Maryland football must win in week 2 against Michigan State.
You are Locked On Terps, your daily podcast on the Maryland Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everyone? I'm Tre Moore, host of Locked On Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So thank you for making us part of your day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports aren't sporting like we want them to, but this summer FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Friday, everyone. I hope you guys had a good week and are headed into a fun weekend. I'm thinking that I'm talking about today. Maryland football must beat Michigan State in week 2 for the Terps to have a successful season. I think this could potentially be the biggest game of the entire season, and I think this game is going to set up how the season goes. Week 2 against Michigan State. This Maryland team has a whole lot of new quarterback, a completely new offensive line, a completely new corner room. We lost guys in our linebacker room. We have a lot of new players on this team, and I don't think we've seen quite this amount of turnover on our roster in the last couple of years. And the main thing is, to me, the new quarterback spot. The other places, it is extremely important as well. Offensive line, corner room, really important too. But I think when I talk about Michigan State being a must-win in week 2, I think a lot about the quarterbacks. And whoever the starter is by that time, I don't care if it's MJ, Billy, Cameron Edge, or somebody else. Whoever the starter is, that week 2 game against Michigan State is going to be a huge indicator on how the rest of the year goes. And what I mean by that is the confidence level, how we see that player play, how we see that quarterback play in week 2 against Michigan State might determine how the rest of the season goes. If you start off on the wrong foot in terms of, your entire team, I'm specifically talking about our new quarterback, but yes, the entire team as well. If you start off on the wrong foot against Michigan State, and that's a team we can 100% lose to at home. Do I think we're in a little bit of a better spot than Michigan State? Yeah, I said it the other day. We get Michigan State at the perfect time because they have a new coach. They have a new quarterback, both who are really talented. They got a really talented new coach from Oregon State. They got a really talented quarterback that followed their coach from Oregon State, who was a highly rated recruit. But I think that we got Michigan State at the right time because it's early on in the season, and they have a whole lot of new, just like us. They have a lot of new starters. They're going through a culture change. And so we get Michigan State, I think, at the right time. But still, it is entirely possible that we win that or we lose that game. I think we will be slight favorites, but I don't think it's above probably through like 4 or 5 points. I doubt it's probably around going to be 3 or 4. I don't think we're going to be favored by much more than that. It's a game that I think realistically could probably go either way. I do think Maryland wins, but I do think it's probably going to be a pretty close game. But that game, if we win, can give, 1, our quarterback a ton of confidence, 2, our entire offense and our entire team a ton of confidence, and we could be set up to go on a really cool run to start the season where we potentially go to Virginia and we're feeling a lot better about ourselves in week 3 on September 14th, a night game against Virginia on the road. We feel a lot better of ourselves and we feel a lot more confident. There's not a bunch of question marks because if we lose to Michigan State week 2, I'm telling you right now, the conversations are going to be, if the quarterback play doesn't play well, which I think is a pretty strong probability if we lose that game to Michigan State. Yeah, you could have a game where it's like 40-37 and both offenses go crazy and maybe we look at the defense. But I doubt the way that Maryland constructed. I doubt that that's how it goes. If we lose to Michigan State, more than likely it's going to be a quarterback problem. And there could be a lot of whispering going around headed into next week against Virginia. If the quarterback play didn't look well in week 2, a lot of people might be saying, oh, this guy should be playing instead, or oh, this guy might get an opportunity to play, or people might start asking Coach Loxley questions. And you know what happens when you start having questions around your quarterback and your quarterback doesn't feel right and your quarterback's not in the right mindset and your quarterback starts to want to play mistake-free football. And when I mean by mistake-free football, obviously you want somebody that's going to play mistake-free football, but then they start getting unaggressive. They miss stuff down the field because they're scared of throwing certain windows because they don't want to get benched. I can entirely see it happening with this Maryland quarterback room. And so I think that it's extremely important in week 2 to beat Michigan State and then head that momentum into the Virginia game. And I also think that if we beat Michigan State, we have a real shot at starting 6-0 with Virginia next and then Villanova and then Indiana and then Northwestern. I think we have a real shot to start the season really good, where if we drop that game, I can see it being a domino effect and where, oh, we lost one to Michigan State and then, oh, we lose another one to Virginia. I think it's extremely important to win that game against Michigan State. The wins later on in the season come a lot harder. It's going to be a lot harder to win later on the season. It's going to be harder to beat Oregon on November 9th later on the season. It's going to be really hard to beat Iowa November 23rd. It's going to be hard to beat Penn State on the last week of the season. It's going to be hard to beat USC October 19th. And so when I look at the first part of the schedule, I look at this Michigan State game as a game that is a huge game at home that we have the opportunity to win, in a game that we should probably win. So I feel like in terms of a game that we also should win, it's important to win those types of games. If Maryland wants to hit their goal of what? Coach Loxley said it on that YouTube the Maryland Athletics page about how they're tired of being 8-5 basically. And if you want to reach, I'm not even saying if you want to reach 9 wins, if you want to get back to where you've been at 8 wins, you probably are going to need to win that Michigan State game. And so I'm looking at it a bunch of different reasons. And I know a lot of you guys are going to say like, oh, but we play UConn before them. And yeah, we do. But UConn to me is going to be a game that we should win no matter what. And yeah, I'm going to be watching that game closely to see how everybody plays. Specifically, of course, the quarterback play. It's what you're normally looking for, but especially with this quarterback battle. But to me, the UConn game might not show that much. I think it's going to be more of a preseason game, more of an NFL type of feel, where we're going to see a lot of different bodies in the UConn game. They're going to make sure they're well rested headed into that Michigan State game, that we're healthy. I wouldn't even be surprised if we see multiple quarterbacks in that UConn game. And so I think the UConn game is important, sure, for its own rights. But I think in terms of the real first game, the real opportunity for us to go, or Michigan State comes to us, for us to play in the shell and to win a big-time game at 3:30 on September 7th is against the Michigan State Spartans, in a game that could set us up to feel a lot better about ourselves headed into next week against Virginia. And you could potentially start the year off really strong if you beat Michigan State. But if you don't beat Michigan State, you could look at a way where Maryland could start off potentially struggling, and one loss can turn into 2. And I think in the first 6 games, yes, I said Maryland has the opportunity to start 6-0. But I think at the worst, if you really want this season to be about where you've been or improved, I think at worst you probably have to go 5-1, and maybe you drop Michigan State game, maybe you drop Virginia, maybe you drop Northwestern or Indiana. But I think realistically, if we want to hit where we want to hit later on the season, it's going to be really hard to win games. Like I said, USC, Oregon, Iowa, Penn State, even Rutgers is better. And so I'm looking at it and I'm saying Maryland probably needs to start the year pretty fast. But Michigan State, it's going to start with that. And if we hit momentum, if we win that game, and we're going to be feeling good about ourselves, and hopefully our quarterback is in the right spot and we play the right way. But I think week 2 against Michigan State is really going to decide a lot of the season, and is honestly a must-win game for the Maryland Terps. Who are some guys that could be unexpected contributors for Maryland football? I think there's a couple of guys that we aren't talking about that could have big impacts and could be having really big camps right now. I'm talking about that after this ad from FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much, and I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All you have to do is open up FanDuel and dream up at bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Guys, I know that football season's coming up, and a lot of you guys want to bet on football. If there's also college football as well, so NFL, college football, you guys have to get over to FanDuel. Also, the MLB season is very much in full swing, so make sure you go on to FanDuel to look at that. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel's official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Who are some Terps that are flying under the radar that could have a huge impact on the Maryland football team next year? I'm thinking of a couple of guys that I don't think have gotten quite the shout outs, that have gotten quite the talk, but could potentially be really high-end guys that really impact us next year. And I want to start in the wide receiver room. There's a ton of names in the receiver room about of guys that could honestly impact us outside of Prather and Felton. But I think Ryan Manning's a kid. He's going into his sophomore year, so he's a second year. I guess he's actually a redshirt freshman. I guess he did redshirt last year, but I think he's a kid where I look at him and I say, I really liked Ryan Manning's game out of St. Francis, and I think he has a chance to potentially make a huge jump next year and really fight for some time for that third receiver position. He caught 2 passes last year for 18 yards, but he was a second-rated wide receiver in Maryland. He was a top 13 player in Maryland, according to ESPN, and he had a ton of yards over there at St. Francis. And so I watch him as a route runner and as a guy that can get open and a guy that can potentially play all over the field. And I say I really like Ryan Manning's game, the redshirt freshman. And I think we're losing Jayshon Jones. I think he's a guy that you could look at outside of Shalik Knox and Octavian Smith. I know those are the two guys we talk about a lot, but I think Ryan Manning has the chance to really play on this team and really make an impact on this team. And I really like his game. And then another guy that we rarely talk about is Braden Wiskolowski, who was our kick returner last year. He's another receiver that he's a gadget guy to me. I think you can kind of play him anywhere in terms of you just want to get him the ball. And in terms of the screen game, in terms of special teams, in terms of just getting open down the field, in terms of his explosive ability, he's a guy that I really believe as a sophomore is another kid that potentially is flying under the radar that I kind of forget about because I mostly think about him as our returner, but he's a guy now in his sophomore year that can make a huge impact on our team, and I'm looking forward to that. And then I move over to the tight end room. I love Dylan Wade. I love Preston Howard. I talked about those two guys. Really important players to the Terps team. Preston, redshirt sophomore, Dylan Wade, a sophomore. But I think it's another sophomore that we're not talking about, an AJ Sininsky that could potentially make a big impact. And I know he's been doing some good things to get his body in the right spot to look like a Big Ten tight end. I read about one of the Maryland coaches talking about him, but I think as a blocker in the tight end room, he could potentially be our best blocker out of the bunch in terms of Preston, Dylan Wade, and AJ. I think he could be a dominant blocker. He's a really big kid. And then he's also mobile at that size. But I think of him as a pretty big-time blocker. I think I always thought he needed to improve a little bit as a receiver, but I think he's a kid that could come in and really help in run blocking situations as the tight end, whether it's a 2 tight end set, whether we're on the goal line, different things like that. I think AJ Sininsky is a kid that could really help us. And then I want to go back to the running back room. Nolan Ray I don't even know if I would count him anymore as the guy that's flying under the radar. But I saw a clip on Maryland's Instagram. Go check out Maryland's Instagram story. Nolan Ray looks explosive. There was a couple clips on there, and it's nice to get a little something out of the fall camp. And I saw Billy Edwards throw a couple nice balls. I've seen MJ Morse throw a nice ball, but I saw Nolan Ray take a run and look really explosive. So he's a guy that I'm looking at that could really make an impact next year for Maryland football. And then headed over to the defensive side of the ball, I think there's a bunch of guys that could potentially make impacts that we aren't talking about enough, but could really be important players for the Maryland defense next year. I think Dylan Gooden's a kid that I'm not exactly sure how Dylan Gooden fits into the Maryland defense. I think he's more – I don't know if he's like more of a inside linebacker or more of an outside type of guy or like a jack. Like I don't know exactly where they would kind of push them. It has him just as – it looks like an inside linebacker on the roster, but 4-star recruit out of good counsel in the DMV area. And I think he's a guy that we could be looking at as he was a redshirt freshman. And he's a guy that could potentially make a jump that we don't expect. And he's kind of next in line to play a lot of minutes for Maryland football. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see Dylan Gooden pop. And then as well as Michael Harris, who I talked about yesterday, as a sophomore that has a chance to really look good and look at complete as a player. And at the linebacker spot, just because we have less experience in that linebacker spot, so it could make sense. I think Dylan Gooden could be behind Kellen Wyatt, play kind of that outside linebacker type of role. And then I also look at Daniel Wingate as a sophomore, as well as a kid that could potentially play in the linebacker room with Wheatland and Rubin as the starters. But we lost Barham and we lost Gote. So you look at Michael and you look at Daniel Wingate, and then another sophomore looking at that could potentially play at some jack is DJ Samuels, the sophomore. So I'm looking at a bunch of sophomores that really need to step up for this team to take the next level I'm looking at. And so I do think that the sophomore class is really important. And I think that there wasn't a ton of guys that played a lot last year, but we're looking at it. Once you have that year in college experience, we're going to expect you to make that jump eventually. So I look at Maryland's sophomore class as a potential to make a big-time jump for Maryland football, and I do really like the sophomore class overall. And so those are just a couple of guys that I think are flying under the radar a little bit that could potentially make more of an impact than we may think that they could make. If you want another guy, I also like Robert Smith in the receiver room. He's a veteran now, redshirt junior, and he also, I think, has a chance to just get some time a little bit. Maryland likes to rotate a lot of different guys, so play a little bit more than he previously had and see where the chips lie. And so I do really think that there's some underrated players on this team, as well as Daniel Owens, a redshirt sophomore on the D-line. I think he has a chance to make an impact as well. But I like this team a lot, and I think there's some guys that could potentially make impacts that we don't expect. And you got to remember, there's always injuries. No matter how much they suck, there's always injuries up front, or everywhere on your football team, not just up front. And so I'm looking at a lot of these guys to whatever happens, if a guy misses the game or two or the season potentially, these are some of the guys that are going to step up and be high-level players for Maryland football. Maryland football lands another commit. Maryland has something going on with the state of Florida. I will talk about that after this ad from the Gametime app. Have you ever wanted to go to a game at the last minute, like a Maryland Terps game, but finding tickets is hard? I have been there before. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Gametime is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guaranteed, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the start of an event and even an hour after it starts. It's a place to find last-minute tickets and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So Maryland football landed another recruit in the 2026 class, and he comes exactly what we need. They get 2026 commit Brian Harris, which is an interesting kind of commit. He's a defensive lineman out of Florida. And I think that is interesting because I was reading about him, and he actually tore his ACL, as a sophomore last fall. And so for him to still get recruited is a pretty big thing. He also has a connection with Coach Williams. It's like a family connection, but it's another recruit in Maryland's 2026 class. So they're starting things off pretty well, it sounds like, with the 2026 class. We got the corner from St. Francis, and now we got Brian Harris from Florida. And this brings me up to say that it's interesting. Maryland's pipeline with Florida is really interesting, but he is listed as an edge, but he's 276. So I don't know exactly if he's going to be on the edge or if we try and put him inside, because 276 seems a bit heavy for me to be on the edge. Apparently, I guess he didn't have offers, or he had an offer from Duke, but he also was interest from Florida State, it sounds like, which is kind of interesting. But he's a guy that definitely has flown under the radar a little bit. Like, he doesn't have a rating or anything, but it goes back to Maryland's connections to Florida, which is very interesting because we recruit Florida at a really high level. Like, Florida has become really important for our roster and our recruiting. Like, if you go through the Maryland football roster, you'll be surprised how many guys are from Florida. There's a lot of guys, and we've recruited it at a really high level. And outside the DMV, I don't think there's a state that has been more crucial to our success the last couple of years than Florida. And of course, Florida's a powerhouse state with plenty of really great high school programs, and it's definitely a top place, a top hotbed for recruits, I would say. I would say you'd probably say Florida's up there with Texas, you would think of. Georgia's definitely up there. The DMV's probably up there as well, but I think Texas and Florida are kings right now. But I do really think that it's nice that we're able to beat out some of these Florida schools, whether it's Florida State, whether it's Florida, whatever school it is down there, Florida UCF. There's plenty of good programs down there. And for us to be winning battles against those types of guys, Miami, that's important. And I think that's important that we've been able to get a lot of these guys. Like, look at our roster. I was going through it. Quayshawn Fuller, he transferred from Florida State. He's originally from Florida. Brandon Jacobs from Florida. Jordan Phillips, who's a starting defensive lineman for us, who's one of our best players up front. Guys, please go check out the video episode 1. I keep forgetting what they call it. It's like a Hard Knocks version of Maryland, and it's like Jordan Phillips is up at 3:30 a.m. trying to get better. Jordan Phillips from Florida. Jonathan Atkins, redshirt freshman from Madison, Florida. Lionel Whitaker has a chance to definitely compete in our cornerback battle this year from Miami, Florida. Perry Fisher, who's supposed to be a starting corner for us this year, from Florida. And I could keep on going. There's more players. Kevin Thomas from Florida. There's plenty of more. Michael Harris from Florida. And so for us to be able to recruit Florida at this high level is pretty cool stuff, because it's important to be able to recruit at somewhere like that, to be able to recruit in a state like Florida. And so I really do think that Maryland's recruiting in Florida is really crucial right now. And I think that outside the DMV, I can't say a state. Like, of course, Virginia, Maryland, and then DC, you don't really consider that a state, I guess. But for this, we'll just say DC as an area. In terms of areas, like, Florida's probably the next best place that we recruit from, which is definitely a good thing. We definitely want to continue to recruit Florida at a high level. Ruben Hippolyte, one of our best players, if not our best player, one of the leaders of this team, is from Florida. So I really do believe that we're doing an awesome job in Florida, and Brian Harris is another guy that I think is going to fit in a need on the defensive line. I've said it. We need to recruit better on the defensive line. And he's a guy that when he comes back from his injury, he'll probably get like a 3-star rating or something. So it'll be interesting. But he's a guy that has tools and stuff. So I haven't been able to watch a ton of him, but I'm excited to see what he can be. And another commit doesn't hurt at all. That's all we have for today. Thank you for listening to Locked on Terps. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're here every day talking Maryland football and basketball. So thank you for listening to Locked on Terps.